No one took the black bride at the station, until a rancher's son pointed, "That's my mama," breaking the hostile silence that greeted the weary woman stepping off the dusty train. The townspeople had already written her off as another discarded mail-order bride, destined to wither under the unforgiving desert sun like so many before her. Their sneers and whispered judgments painted her future in shades of failure and abandonment. But the weathered rancher standing beside that eager boy froze in recognition. This was the woman who had vanished from his life 5 years ago, taking his heart and leaving only questions. Now she stood before a son she'd never known existed, while he harbored wounds that had never healed. The dangerous secrets that followed her to this God-forsaken station threatened to destroy not just their second chance at love, but the innocent child caught between them. Would this shocking reunion heal their shattered family, or would the truth lurking in her past consume them all? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The train wheezed to a halt at Copper Ridge Station, belching steam into the Nevada desert air. Serafina Freeman stepped onto the wooden platform, her once white wedding dress now stained with dust and disappointment. The carpetbag in her trembling hands contained everything she owned in the world. Her intended husband had abandoned her 3 stops back. He took one look at her dark skin and declared their arrangement null and void. Now she faced another crowd of strangers, hoping someone might need a seamstress or cook. The station master glanced up from his ledger, his expression souring. A group of women in their Sunday finest turned away, whispering behind gloved hands. Men spat tobacco juice and shook their heads. Children stared until their mothers yanked them close. Serafina had seen these looks before. In every town, at every station, the story remained the same. A colored woman in a wedding dress was either a joke or a threat, never a person deserving help. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she approached the station master's window. He slammed it shut before she could speak. The message was clear: move along. Her stomach cramped with hunger. She had eaten nothing but stale bread for 2 days. The corn frozen behind the boy. Nathaniel Moore was known throughout Copper Ridge as a fair but private rancher. He employed more hands than anyone in the territory and paid honest wages. Now he stared at Serafina as if seeing a ghost. Recognition hit her like a physical blow. 5 years had weathered his face and broadened his shoulders, but those green eyes remained unchanged. The same eyes that had once looked at her with love instead of shock. The boy tugged at his father's sleeve, chattering excitedly about finally meeting his mama. Serafina's world tilted. She pressed a hand to her chest, struggling to breathe. A son. She had a son. The townspeople exchanged meaningful glances. Horace Granger, who owned the general store, stepped forward with arms crossed. His voice carried the weight of moral authority. Nathaniel's jaw worked silently. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. The boy looked between them with growing confusion, his earlier joy fading into uncertainty. Serafina found her voice at last. It came out as barely a whisper. She had dreamed of this moment countless times, but never like this. Never with an audience of hostile strangers watching her every move. The boy's face lit up again. He grabbed her hand with the trusting nature of a child who had been told bedtime stories about his missing mother. His touch sent warmth shooting through her entire body. Nathaniel finally spoke, his words clipped and cold. The tenderness she remembered had been replaced by something harder, angrier. He asked where she had been, why she had left without a word, why she had never tried to find them. Each question felt like a knife twist. The truth sat heavy on her tongue, too dangerous to speak aloud. Not here. Not with so many watching. Some secrets required privacy and time. Serafina glanced toward the horizon, a nervous habit she had developed over the years. Someone could be watching, following. She had been running for so long that looking over her shoulder had become second nature. The boy chattered about ranch life, about his horse, about the room he had always kept ready for her. His innocence broke her heart and mended it simultaneously. This child was hers. The miracle she had never known. His tongue in front of the child. There would be time for interrogation later, time for accusations and demands for explanations she could not safely give. The ranch appeared over a rise, larger and more prosperous than she remembered. Corrals held fine horses. The house had been expanded, painted, improved. Nathaniel had built a good life here, a life she had not been part of. As they pulled into the yard, Serafina's stomach twisted with more than hunger. Joy at finding her son warred with terror over what might follow her here. The telegram at the station meant someone knew where to find her. Time was running out, and she had only just begun to live again. The first week at the Moore Ranch tested every ounce of Serafina's resolve. Sammy followed her everywhere, soaking up her attention like desert sand drinking rain. His joy was infectious and heartbreaking. He had waited 8 years to meet his mother. Nathaniel maintained cold distance. He watched her interactions with Sammy, but offered no warmth himself. Questions burned in his eyes during shared meals. Why had she left? Where had she been? The answers would have to wait for private moments that never came. Town proved more hostile than the ranch. Serafina accompanied Nathaniel for supplies on her second day. The trip to Copper Ridge became a gauntlet of stares and whispers. Horace Granger stood behind his store counter like a judge presiding over court. His wife refused to acknowledge Serafina's presence entirely. Other customers stepped aside when she approached, creating invisible barriers around every aisle. The general store fell silent when she entered. Conversations died mid-sentence. Children were pulled closer to their mothers. Serafina selected basic necessities with practiced efficiency, ignoring the hostile atmosphere. At the fabric counter, she examined bolts of cotton and wool. The quality was poor compared to what she had known, but her fingers still recognized good weave from bad. Years of forced needlework had taught her to judge materials by touch alone. Horace's voice carried across the store. He questioned Nathaniel about bringing certain types of people around decent folk. His words were carefully chosen, but their meaning was clear. Serafina did not belong. Hands. The nearest veterinarian lived 2 days' ride away. Ranch hands gathered around the stall, discussing options in grim tones. Some suggested putting the animal down to end his suffering. The stallion was valuable, but a lame horse served no purpose on a working ranch. Serafina studied the wound from outside the stall. The cut was deep but clean. No major tendons appeared severed. With proper care, the leg could heal completely. She spoke quietly to Nathaniel, offering to examine the horse. His initial refusal was swift and certain. She persisted, explaining that delay would only worsen the injury. Time was the stallion's enemy now. Reluctantly, Nathaniel opened the stall door. The horse shied away from strangers, but Serafina's calm presence gradually soothed his fears. She ran gentle hands along his neck, whispering soft words until his breathing steadied. Her examination was thorough and professional. She cleaned the wound with whiskey, then applied a poultice made from kitchen herbs. Her hands moved with practiced skill, revealing knowledge that went far beyond basic first aid. The ranch hands watched in amazement. This woman understood animal anatomy better than most men who had worked with horses their entire lives. Her technique suggested formal training rather than folk wisdom. Nathaniel asked where she had learned such skills. Serafina's answer was carefully vague. She mentioned learning from someone knowledgeable during her time away. The explanation satisfied no one, but raised no further questions. Over the following days, she tended the stallion with devotion that impressed even skeptical ranch hands. The horse responded well to her care. His wound healed cleanly without infection. Within a week, he bore weight on the injured leg without favoring it. Word of her success spread beyond the ranch. Other horse owners arrived seeking her expertise. A mare with difficult labor, a gelding with mysterious lameness, a colt with respiratory problems. Each case showcased different aspects of her medical knowledge. Serafina treated each animal with the same careful attention she had given the stallion. Her success rate was remarkable. Animals that seemed beyond help recovered under her care. Those too far gone died peacefully instead of suffering needlessly. Corrected grammar with gentle patience that encouraged rather than criticized. These displays of intelligence surprised Nathaniel most of all. The woman he remembered had been lovely, but uneducated. This Serafina possessed knowledge that spoke of formal training. Someone had invested considerable time in her education. But questions about her past still went unanswered. She deflected inquiries with practiced ease, changing subjects before revelations could emerge. Her evasiveness suggested secrets too dangerous for casual conversation. Late at night, Serafina stood at her bedroom window scanning the horizon. Fear lived in her bones now, a constant companion that never fully rested. Someone would come looking, eventually. Her peaceful days at the ranch were borrowed time against an inevitable reckoning. The telegraph operator's knowing look haunted her dreams. Winter arrived early that year, bringing storms that turned the Nevada desert into a frozen wasteland. Snow piled against the ranch house windows, while wind howled through every crack and crevice. The nearest neighbors lived miles away across impassable roads. Sammy had been fighting a fever for 2 days. What started as sniffles and tiredness escalated into something far more dangerous. His small body burned with heat that soaked through blankets and nightclothes. Delirium made him call for people who were not there. Nathaniel paced the kitchen like a caged animal. The town doctor lived 15 miles away, across roads now blocked by snowdrifts higher than a man's head. No horse could navigate the treacherous terrain in this weather. Help would not come from outside. Ranch hands gathered in the main room, speaking in hushed tones about childhood fevers that claimed young lives. Stories circulated about families who lost children to mysterious illnesses that doctors could not cure. Winter made everything worse by trapping families with their tragedies. Serafina took charge with quiet authority that brooked no argument. She moved through the house gathering supplies and issuing instructions to anyone within earshot. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the growing panic around her. She examined Sammy with the thoroughness of someone who understood dangerous symptoms. His fever spiked beyond what most children could survive. Breathing came in shallow pants that explained that Sammy's fever resulted from his body fighting an infection that had settled in his chest. Without proper treatment, the illness could progress to his lungs and heart. Children died from such fevers when their small bodies could not sustain the fight. For 3 days and nights, Serafina never left Sammy's bedside. She monitored his breathing, adjusted his treatments, and maintained constant vigil over his fragile condition. Sleep became a luxury she could not afford while death stalked her son. During the worst moments, when his fever reached dangerous heights, she sang lullabies that seemed to calm his restless spirit. Her voice carried melodies that spoke of education and refinement. These were not songs learned in frontier towns, but compositions from a more cultured world. Nathaniel brought her meals that she barely touched. Coffee grew cold beside her chair as she focused entirely on Sammy's needs. Her dedication impressed even the most hardened ranch hands who had witnessed frontier hardships. On the second night, Sammy's fever broke temporarily. He opened his eyes and recognized his mother sitting beside his bed. His weak smile rewarded her sleepless efforts. For a few precious hours, hope returned to the house. But the illness fought back with renewed strength. His fever spiked higher than before, pushing his small body beyond normal endurance. Serafina worked frantically to bring down his temperature before permanent damage occurred to his developing brain. She prepared cold compresses with methodical precision. Each placement targeted specific pulse points that would cool his blood most efficiently. Her technique revealed understanding of human anatomy that went far beyond basic knowledge. Herbal preparations became more complex as conventional treatments proved insufficient. She combined ingredients in ratios that suggested extensive study of medicinal properties. These were not remedies passed down through generations, but scientific applications of botanical knowledge. The third night brought the crisis everyone feared. Sammy's breathing became labored and irregular. His fever pushed beyond the limits of what his small heart could sustain. Death waited in the shadows of his room like an unwelcome visitor. Serafina refused to surrender. She applied every technique she had ever learned, drawing on knowledge that surprised even herself. Years beginning to understand. Dawn broke clear and cold on the fourth day. Sammy's fever had finally broken permanently, leaving behind a weak but breathing child. His eyes opened with clarity that had been absent for days. The immediate danger had passed. Serafina collapsed into her chair with exhaustion that came from sustained terror. 3 days of constant vigilance had drained every reserve of strength she possessed. But her son would live to see another day. Ranch hands gathered outside Sammy's door to witness the miracle. The woman they had initially viewed with suspicion had proved herself in the most fundamental way possible. She had saved a child's life through knowledge and dedication that commanded respect. Nathaniel looked at Serafina with new eyes. The woman who had vanished from his life 5 years ago had returned with skills that spoke of experiences he could barely imagine. Her medical knowledge raised questions about where she had been and what she had endured. But those questions could wait. Their son was alive, and that was all that mattered now. Spring arrived with a gentleness that matched the new peace settling over the Moore ranch. Sammy had recovered completely from his winter illness, growing stronger each day under his mother's watchful care. The crisis had transformed their fragile family unit into something genuine and lasting. Word of Serafina's medical skills spread throughout the territory. Neighboring ranchers arrived regularly, seeking her expertise with sick animals and injured workers. Her reputation as a healer opened doors that had remained firmly closed since her arrival. The transformation in community attitudes became evident during their weekly trips to town. Conversations no longer died when she entered Horace Granger's store. Women nodded politely instead of turning away. Children stared with curiosity rather than fear. Horace himself had softened considerably after his grandson suffered a riding accident. Serafina's quick treatment had prevented permanent damage to the boy's shoulder. Gratitude overcame prejudice when personal stakes were involved. Even the local preacher acknowledged her contributions during Sunday services. He spoke of good Samaritans and healing gifts, questions about her missing years that she still deflected with practiced ease. Her education had clearly continued during their separation, but under circumstances she refused to discuss. The mystery deepened rather than resolving. Sammy thrived under his mother's attention. His schoolwork improved dramatically with her patient tutoring. Reading became a shared pleasure rather than a tedious chore. Mathematics transformed from struggle to strength under her guidance. She taught him practical skills alongside academic subjects, basic medical knowledge that might save lives in emergencies, botanical identification that distinguished healing herbs from poisonous plants, navigation techniques using stars and landmarks that could guide lost travelers home. Her teaching methods suggested formal training rather than intuitive knowledge. Lessons followed logical progressions that built understanding systematically. This was not folklore passed down through generations, but scientific education acquired through rigorous study. The Spring Festival approached with excitement that infected the entire community. Annual celebrations brought together families from across the territory for dancing, competitions, and social interaction that sustained frontier life through long winter months. Nathaniel found himself planning more than just attendance. The traveling jeweler who visited during festivals carried rings and trinkets that caught sunlight like captured stars. One particular piece had drawn his attention for weeks. Sammy participated eagerly in the secret planning. The boy understood that his parents deserved happiness after years of separation and struggle. His enthusiasm for their reunion gave Nathaniel courage to hope for a genuine second chance. Private conversations between Nathaniel and Serafina grew longer and more intimate. They spoke of dreams deferred, of mistakes made, of possibilities that stretched ahead like open prairie. Old attraction rekindled into something deeper than youthful passion. She helped with ranch business, applying organizational skills that streamlined operations and increased profits. Her suggestions for horse breeding showed understanding of genetics that impressed experienced ranchers. Every contribution strengthened her position in their shared life. But shadows from her past still haunted quiet moments. Serafina continued checking horizons and jumping at unexpected sounds. Fear lived in her bones, despite the safety she had found at the ranch. Something, or someone, remained that surprised longtime residents. Her organizational abilities rivaled those of women who had spent decades managing frontier social events. Decorations emerged from her creative vision that transformed the simple town square into something approaching elegance. Food preparations benefited from her knowledge of herbs and seasonings that elevated basic ingredients into memorable dishes. Dancing lessons with Sammy in their kitchen revealed grace and training that spoke of formal instruction. She moved with confidence that came from education rather than natural ability. Someone had invested considerable time in her social accomplishments. Nathaniel watched these displays with growing certainty that he wanted to rebuild their life together permanently. The festival would provide the perfect opportunity to declare his intentions publicly. Their community would witness their commitment and offer support for their future. The ring hidden in his dresser drawer represented more than jewelry. It symbolized his faith in their ability to overcome whatever secrets still stood between them. Love had survived 5 years of separation and grown stronger through testing. Festival Day dawned clear and warm, perfect for outdoor celebrations. Families arrived from distant ranches, transforming Copper Ridge into a bustling center of territorial social life. Music and laughter filled the air with infectious joy. Serafina wore her finest dress, a creation she had sewn herself from fabric chosen with careful attention to color and style. Her appearance drew admiring glances that acknowledged her beauty and newfound social acceptance. But her eyes kept drifting toward the horizon with that familiar, anxious expression. Even surrounded by celebration, she could not fully escape whatever shadows followed her from those lost years. The proposal would wait for sunset, when the dancing reached its peak and the entire community gathered to witness their happiness. If shadows from her past would allow it. The festival reached its peak as sunset painted the desert sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Couples swayed to fiddle music while children chased fireflies between the dancers. Nathaniel's hand found the ring box in his pocket, waiting for the perfect moment to change their lives forever. Serafina laughed at something Sammy whispered in her ear. her face radiant with happiness that had been absent for too long. The community had embraced them as a family, offering acceptance that once seemed impossible. Commanding presence spoke of wealth and power that dwarfed anything Copper Ridge had ever seen. Behind him stood men who were clearly not ranch hands, but something far more dangerous. The music died as festival-goers recognized the threat these strangers represented. Children pressed closer to their parents, while men instinctively moved toward whatever weapons they carried. The celebration transformed into something tense and potentially violent. Whitfield's gaze swept the crowd until it settled on Serafina. His smile held no warmth, only the satisfaction of a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. She went pale as death, her body trembling with recognition and terror. He addressed her formally, using a name that was not Serafina Freeman. Mrs. Marcus Whitfield, he called her, his legal wife, who had abandoned her marital duties. The words struck the gathered crowd like physical blows, challenging everything they thought they knew. Legal papers emerged from his coat, documents bearing official seals and signatures. A marriage certificate dated 5 years ago, signed in her own handwriting. Property deeds that listed her as his legal possession under territorial law. Evidence that seemed impossible to dispute. The territorial marshal stepped forward, his badge catching firelight as he studied the documents. His grim expression confirmed their apparent legitimacy. Under current laws, a wife belonged to her husband regardless of her personal feelings on the matter. Nathaniel moved protectively in front of Sammy, while his mind struggled to process this revelation. The woman he loved, the mother of his child, was legally married to another man. Their entire reunion had been built on a foundation that was crumbling beneath them. Serafina found her voice at last, speaking with quiet dignity that commanded attention despite her desperate circumstances. She denied giving consent to any marriage, declared the documents fraudulent, and accused Whitfield of crimes that made several men reach for their weapons. Her story emerged in broken pieces that painted a picture of unthinkable cruelty. Kidnapping, on what should have been her wedding day to Nathaniel. Years of imprisonment on a remote estate where she had been forced to serve as both prisoner and unwilling wife. The medical knowledge that had saved Sammy's life came from being forced to tend Whitfield's workers when was a gift to occupy her mind. The education was his investment in her improvement. Her escape was the action of someone not thinking clearly. The territorial marshal found himself caught between conflicting stories with no clear way to determine truth. Legal documents supported Whitfield's claims, while only Serafina's word challenged them. Frontier law favored written proof over emotional testimony. But the community had witnessed Serafina's character through months of selfless service. Her dedication to Sammy during his illness, her contributions to ranch life, her integration into their social fabric. These people knew her in ways that legal papers could never capture. Horace Granger stepped forward first, his voice carrying the weight of respected community leadership. He testified to her medical skills, her intelligence, her obvious love for the boy who called her mother. Other voices joined his in a chorus of support that surprised everyone. The preacher spoke of her Christian charity. Ranch hands described her tireless work with injured animals. Women recalled her contributions to community events and her patient teaching of their children. A character witness parade that challenged Whitfield's narrative. But character testimony could not override legal documents in territorial court. The marshal's duty was clear, regardless of personal feelings. A wife belonged to her husband under current law, and these papers appeared legitimate. Nathaniel stepped forward with desperate courage, challenging Whitfield to prove his claims through investigation, rather than accepting papers at face value. If Serafina had been kidnapped and held against her will, evidence would exist beyond these convenient documents. The suggestion sparked heated argument between the two men that threatened to escalate into violence. Whitfield's guards moved closer, while festival-goers formed protective circles around their families. The evening balanced on the edge of bloodshed. That was when the telegraph operator pushed through the crowd, clutching yellow papers that fluttered in the evening breeze. His face bore the expression of someone who had discovered something significant. The truth was about to emerge from an unexpected source. The telegraph operator burst through the circle of tense onlookers, his weathered face flushed with excitement and righteous anger. Thomas Hardy had worked the telegraph lines for his silver hair and expensive suits. A second message originated from a church in Wyoming, where a young woman had sought sanctuary 5 years ago. The priest remembered her clearly because she had been beaten and traumatized, claiming she had escaped from a forced marriage to a man who held her against her will. The third telegram proved most damaging of all. A clerk in the territorial capital had discovered irregularities in marriage records filed under suspicious circumstances. Documents had been backdated, signatures had been forged, and bribes had been paid to officials who were now facing criminal charges. Thomas Hardy's voice grew stronger as he read each revelation. He had spent weeks investigating after recognizing Serafina from descriptions in various law enforcement communications. The truth had been hiding in telegraph wires that connected honest lawmen across the frontier. Whitfield's composed facade cracked as the evidence mounted against him. His guards shifted nervously, recognizing that their employer's situation had become untenable. Legal documents meant nothing when proven fraudulent by multiple independent sources. The territorial marshal's expression hardened as he absorbed the implications. He had nearly enforced illegal papers that would have returned a kidnapping victim to her captor. His duty now lay in protecting Serafina rather than delivering her to Whitfield. Serafina stood straighter as vindication washed over her like cleansing rain. 5 years of fear and shame began lifting from her shoulders as the truth emerged from shadows where it had been hidden. She was not a runaway wife, but an escaped prisoner. Her story poured forth with details that matched the telegraph evidence perfectly. The guardian who had sold her to pay gambling debts, the forged consent papers that made her supposed marriage appear legal, the remote estate where she had been held like a captive animal. She described years of forced medical training under a doctor who visited the estate to treat Whitfield's various ailments. Her education had come from being required to read to him during his recovery from injuries. Every skill that had served her well at the ranch had been learned in captivity. The escape had taken months of careful planning. She had stolen clothes, money, and papers during a moment when guards were distracted by a kitchen fire. The journey to Nevada had been a desperate flight toward freedom that had led her to the train station where Sammy found her. As forgeries, bank withdrawals corresponded exactly to dates when officials had received suspicious payments. The community's mood shifted from confusion to outrage as they realized how close they had come to witnessing a terrible injustice. Men who had initially been swayed by Whitfield's legal papers now surrounded him with hostile intent. The territorial marshal took charge before vigilante justice could erupt into violence. He placed Whitfield and his guards under arrest for kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy. Their weapons were confiscated, and their hands were bound for transport to the territorial capital. Whitfield's final words were threats of legal retaliation and promises of eventual revenge. His guards remained silent, calculating whether cooperation with authorities might reduce their own sentences. The architect of Serafina's suffering was finally facing consequences for his crimes. As the prisoners were loaded into wagons for transport, the festival atmosphere slowly returned. Musicians tuned their instruments while children emerged from behind their parents' protective embraces. Justice had prevailed, without bloodshed or violence. Serafina found herself surrounded by apologetic community members who had initially doubted her story. Women who had shunned her now offered friendship and support. Men who had questioned her presence now welcomed her as a permanent neighbor. Nathaniel approached with the ring box still clutched in his trembling hand. The evening had not unfolded as he had planned, but the outcome was better than he had dared hope. Serafina was free to choose her own future without shadows from the past threatening their happiness. His proposal came simply and directly, without elaborate speeches or grand gestures. He offered her his name, his home, and his heart, with the understanding that she was finally free to accept or refuse without coercion. Her acceptance came through tears of relief and joy that had been building for 5 long years. The ring fit perfectly, symbolizing their ability to overcome obstacles that had once seemed insurmountable. The wedding ceremony took place 3 weeks later, in the same field where they had planned to marry 5 years ago. The entire community attended to witness their union and celebrate the triumph of love over injustice. Sammy stood proudly between his parents, no longer a boy dreaming of his missing mother, but a son whose family was finally complete. The ranch that had